Welcome. Thank you for joining our Best Practice Series webinar. I'm Becky Melody, your hostess for today's presentation. Jay Crowley, Vice President and Subject Matter Expert for the USDM UDI Track and Trace practice, will be presenting. The discussion today will cover introductions, webinar logistics, and our discussion topic, the FDA's UDI Non-Sterile Implant Label Extension. We're very proud to have Jay Crowley leading the UDI team for USDM. Jay worked directly for the FDA for 27 years and most recently as Senior Advisor for the Patient Safety in the FDA Center for Devices and Radiological Health. He developed the framework and authored key requirements for the FDA's unique device identification system. Jay also led the team responsible for the development and implementation of UDI requirements. With USDM Life Sciences, Jay focuses exclusively on providing business process technology and compliance solutions for our clients in the regulated life science industry. USDM is focused exclusively on the life science domain. We're the market leader in providing quality and regulatory IT compliance professional service solutions. We're headquartered in Santa Barbara, California, and we've delivered more than 1,000 successful projects with over 300 life science clients. We offer hands-on experience assisting clients with remediation when under regulatory distress, and we're the market leader for validation accelerator packs. The various dedicated practices include global quality and auditing, IT and virtualization, Life Sciences Cloud, GRC, Laboratory, which of course is systems and equipment, ECM, ERP, PLM, EQM, Manufacturing Automation and Equipment, Clinical and Drug Safety, Business Intelligence, Project Management, and Program Management, of course, and the UDI Track and Trace practice. The content of the presentation will be covered in approximately 30 minutes, and then we'll invite you to post questions for our team via the message board you'll find on the lower left of your screen. Or you could join the discussion on LinkedIn and post any questions there. And of course, we're happy to address anything offline as well. If there's something of a confidential nature, just shoot us a note at usdm@usdm.com. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us today, and with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Jay.
Great. Thank you, Becky, and good day, everyone. Thank you for joining. We are going to talk specifically about the recently published non-sterile implant label extension. But before I get into what that is, I want to talk a little bit about why we are where we are in relation to non-sterile implants. This is a slide that I've used for some time, so if you've been on other presentations, you've probably seen this. But there are a host of benefits that I believe we all see, that FDA sees with the development of the UDI system, and you can see them there. Many of them are related both to FDA's post-market surveillance efforts as well as to various initiatives within the supply chain. But what I really want to draw your attention to is what I believe FDA, and I think the recent letter that came out supports FDA's intent with the UDI rule. And that really is to support a granular identification, or to facilitate granular identification, to support a host of post-market surveillance activities. And you can see a number of them listed there. Adverse event reporting, really development of large population-based data sets, for example, claims data, as well as registries. And we've seen the beginnings of some of these efforts with FDA and other stakeholders already started. FDA has also spelled all of this out in much more detail in their National Medical Device Post-Market Surveillance Plan, which really draws very clearly a picture where UDI captured in electronic clinical information systems will be the basis for the future of their post-market surveillance. So I give this background so that we understand that the ability to capture UDI and to then use that information is central to FDA's intent with the UDI program. So being able to capture, for example, the specific UDI of a device that is being implanted in a patient's electronic health record is central to the activities that FDA is looking to facilitate with the development of the UDI system. And with that brings us really to the letter that FDA published November 19th of last year, granting a one-year extension for the labels of non-sterile implants. I want to back up half a sec because what's important to realize is that in the proposed rule that we published, that FDA published for UDI, there was actually a requirement for the direct marking, putting a UDI on all implants. And you can see that there's a list of exceptions that was in the proposed rule that is also in the final rule for direct marking. But that really was developed around the direct marking, or originally developed, and I think fundamentally still speaks to the marking of implants. And there were a couple of use cases that the direct marking of implants was intended to support. The first and probably most obvious one is to identify an implant at the point of implantation, so that you would scan the implant as it's going into the operating room or into the surgical field, and then you would be able to record the specific implant that was being used. During the comment period for the proposed rule, FDA received a lot of comments, and actually a lot of very well constructed comments about the cost and complexity of directly marking implants. For some larger active implants, ICD for example, this wasn't too difficult. But when you got into a lot of the orthopedic space in particular, where marking could affect the integrity of the device, it became a problem. Size became a problem. Complexity of implementation became a problem. So in the analysis of the comments and in the movement from the proposed to final rule, FDA removed this requirement that implants be directly marked, so that we removed this particular requirement, instead relied on the label and packaging UDI to provide identification of that implant. But I believe in that removal, there was this gap that was created that now exists, and now AdvaMed brought to FDA's attention, and FDA responded to this gap that exists. How do we then identify a specific implant at the point of implantation, which was always the goal, the intent of UDI, again, going back to the subsequent slide that I showed, and it's repeated again in this implant extension letter that if you have not seen, I encourage you to take a look at. It is on FDA's website under the extensions that have been granted. To the letter and to the point, FDA did extend the labeling requirements only, the compliance date for these devices, from September 24th of 2015 to September 24th of 2016. So these are, by definition, implants, obviously, and therefore most are Class 2 and therefore are subject to what we call the FDAs timeline. So in the FDA and Safety and Innovations Act, there was a new requirement that was added to the UDI legislation, which was subsequently posted as a amended proposal to the proposed rule, which created this new timeline. So we talk about FDAs devices, all life-supporting, life-sustaining, and implants have to meet the UDI requirements otherwise by September 24th of 2015. So this extension provided to non-sterile implants, and we'll talk more about what that means in a moment, it extends the label requirement, so the identification requirement, to 2016. Very important to note that the submission of data to the Global Unique Device Identification Database, or the GoodID, is not extended. So it only applies to the label requirement. So the placement of the UDI on the label and the date formatting requirement are extended to 2016, but the data requirements still exist for 2015. Important to note, I think that AdvaMed had requested really 2 years, so to 2017, for all parts of the UDI requirements, and you can see that in fact FDA did not accept that. It gave them just 1 year, but kept the good ID requirements as they were. You can see the last line of the slide really talks to the kinds of devices that we're talking about, and that's critical as you consider which of your devices are subject to this extension and which are not. And we really are talking about those devices that are supplied non-sterile by the manufacturer in whatever form and are intended to be sterilized before use. So it is a fairly limited set of devices, and it's a fairly limited set of those devices depending on how they're distributed. Talk more about that in a moment. These are the 3 criteria that FDA has applied to the types of devices that are applicable to this extension. Again, it's really those Class 2 FDAs devices, and there is a list of those by product code in the extension letter as well. They do need to be implants as defined by FDA or as classified by FDA. And again, that pro code list does describe those devices. And again, it's those devices that are packaged or distributed non-sterile to the end user and are intended to be sterilized before use. And I think most people who are operating in this space understand that these are devices that are primarily distributed in kits, sets, trays, whatever term you want to use, caddies, but it's those devices and that distribution method that we're talking about here. And those are the devices that we need to find a way of providing the UDI moving forward. I think most important in the letter, and this has been maybe a point of confusion, is that FDA reiterated the purpose of the UDI rule as it relates to implants and as it relates to this issue, and goes back to some of my initial slides, but that the goal really is to identify a device up to and including the point of use with patients. So this is not, if you will, not just a supply chain issue. I'm just not looking to see where that device is, but that I have the ability to identify a specific device at the point of patient use. So that's always been the goal. That has been stated many times, but I think the FDA has reiterated that point, particularly as it relates to these devices. It did talk about the direct marking requirement as well, that it had been in the proposed rule, was taken out in response to industry comment, really, that they thought it was too difficult and too expensive and too complex, but that also in response to that the UDI on the label or package device would be an adequate way of identifying that device up to the point of implantation. So, there is that issue that industry has already stated that they believe that UDI can be made available at that point of implantation. And finally, FDA did in the letter also reiterate the notion of the availability of UDI so that it could be incorporated into patients, for example, patients' electronic health records. They gave other examples of clinical information system and other records. But importantly, that there was a way of identifying this implant at the point of implantation and recording that in an electronic way. So what is the purpose of the time extension? Why are we in this space? Well, it goes back to what I was saying before, that with the removal of the direct marking requirement, we now have this gap in how we are identifying devices, and this realization now, I believe, that the implants, the non-sterile implants, typically are removed from whatever original packaging they were in that had a UDI on them, are put into some sort of mechanism, a tray or caddy or set, and then are sterilized and then brought into the operating room. So we now have significantly lost our traceability of that individual implant as it moves from its original packaging, where it was UDI compliant, into a set, into a tray or caddy, and into sterilization, and finally into an operating room. So we've now lost that connection. And this time extension has been granted to allow labelers to find a way of, device manufacturers to find a way of making sure that the UDI is available at the point of use. Now, you can see that these are quoted statements, so this is what FDA is reiterating. Again, the purpose of the rule and the purpose of the time extension is to make sure that the activities that we're taking around non-sterile implants are going to ultimately provide the UDI at the point of implantation. In the last bullet on the slide, you can see that there is some discussion of other devices and other manufacturers who have done certain activities. I would include Class 3 devices, so of course there are certain Class 3 devices that are also distributed in this way. They may already be on the market in various UDI compliant mechanisms, but that this extension really also applies to these devices and also is intended to require that the UDI is available at that point of implantation. So for those manufacturers of Class 3 products who have or are distributing those products in what you might consider to be a UDI compliant manner, understand that the FDA's intention is that the UDI is available at the point of implantation, so that if whatever UDI solution you have in place doesn't do that, you need to find a solution that does provide for that visibility of the device. I want to put this up again. I have copied this because I think it speaks notionally to the intent of the time extension, and it wasn't just to give you more time to put a UDI on the label, and it speaks to the purpose of the whole exception process, alternative and exception process that FDA created in the UDI rule. And it wasn't primarily intended to provide more time. It wasn't primarily intended to carve out certain segments of the industry. It was really allowed or to provide a way for manufacturers who wanted to do things in a way that provided better identification or more accurate identification. So in the time extension letter, FDA said the purpose of this time extension is to allow for a method to be developed that is more accurate and precise than the method that is already described, which is a label method. So subpart B, you can see there, is the requirement that a UDI be on the label of a device and its packaging. So this extension really talks to the need to create and implement a methodology that really goes beyond a label and provides more accurate and precise identification at that point of implantation. So this is if you will, a step above or a step beyond basic label requirements and talks to the need to provide UDI again at that point of implantation. Just to ground everyone, these are the penalties for failure to meet UDI. Now, to date, I don't believe that any manufacturer has received any warning letters or 483s in response to failure to meet UDI requirements. But there is a lot of power behind the UDI rule and a lot that can be brought to the table if your devices are not UDI compliant. And FDA has made clear that UDI compliance for non-sterile implants means making the UDI available at the point of implantation. So just to level set everyone on what this all means and why this is important to take into consideration. I think a number of issues to consider as you move forward in understanding what this means. There are, I know, a number of manufacturers that have used the kit exception, the convenience kit exception, to identify a kit. And we're talking about, and FDA has said that things like medical procedure trays are kits. So a number of manufacturers have said, okay, I've put a kit exception. I'm using the kit exception. I'm putting a UDI on my tray or my caddy, and that's fine. But as we can see, I think at this point, the assumption is that you have visibility and traceability of all of the specific implants in that tray at all times. So that's what the use of that kit exception means and implies for UDI and for the identification of an individual implant within that tray or caddy. I think hopefully I've made clear that it's a company's responsibility to assure traceability of an individual implant. Once it is removed, its intent is to be removed from that packaging and put into a tray or a kit, that you still have a responsibility to ensure continued traceability of that device up until that point of implantation. I think it's critical as we move forward to understand, for any individual manufacturer to understand the various business requirements and use cases associated with field replenishment. This is really, I think, where the rubber hits the road on this one. For those kits that are coming back immediately after use to a manufacturer, to a kitting center, I think the issues are very different. I think if we're talking about field replenishment, there's a whole host of other activities that need to be taken into account. And finally, I know that a number of manufacturers have taken advantage of the existing inventory exception for those kits that are already in the field. It's important to manage manage the identification of those kits, and manage the implementation of whatever solution you come up with to meet the requirements that we've just talked about for all of your kits, including those that you're taking the existing inventory exception for. After 3 years, whether it's 3 years past 2014 or 2015 or 2016, whichever compliance date, all of those devices, if they were in existing inventory, need to be UDI compliant. So need to manage all of that very closely and very well. There are a number of options. There are pros and cons to all of them. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these, but I just wanted to put them out there. There are a number of options that are available that can bring you closer to this point of providing the UDI at the point of implantation. There's 5 here that I'm going to list. There probably are others that people are working on, which is great, but I just want to quickly go through these 5 to leave a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. Obviously, you could individually package each sterile implant or each implant in a sterile package. So there are no trays and caddies. Everything is in its own package, as it probably was when it was originally manufactured. There are obviously pros and cons to this approach, but that is one way of dealing with the problem of identification of the device at the point of implantation. You could provide some tag on the device. This is a Medtronic tag, and thank you for Medtronic for allowing us to see this. There may be other tags under development, but somehow this does provide a way of identifying that device, stays with that product up until the point when it is removed at the point of use. We could go back to the notions of direct part marking. Obviously, this was the original envisioned approach for identifying implants. There are many implants that can be direct marked or direct part marked. In this case, laser etching, for example, of a data matrix on an implant or an instrument. However, there are many devices that are much too small, or their geometry is much too complex to allow for this. So there are some devices for which this might be a solution. It's probably important to note that for most manufacturers, one solution probably isn't going to work for all devices. It'll be some sort of mix of these solutions that we're talking about that will allow you to meet the intent of FDA's UDI rule here. And finally, there is some discussion of kind of an inference model. People have different terms for this. Inventory control sheet is one, but some sort of matrix solution that allows you to know that in a particular location, a particular device exists. Obviously, there is some challenge in implementing this from a paper method, but it would provide for a way of identifying an individual implant, again, at the point of implantation. Finally, I want to spend just about a minute here talking about a product that USDM is working on, something that we call UDI Connect. And it allows, it's a mobile application built on the Salesforce platform that allows someone to scan a UDI barcode and then to obtain information about an individual device based on the information that is in FDA's Good ID. This is very useful for people who want to know some information about a specific product. It also allows us, and what we're working on now, it allows us to leverage that tool to build in, again, a cloud-based Salesforce environment, a tool to identify kits and understand all the individual components that are within a kit. So this is a tool that we are working on, and if anyone is interested, we're happy to talk to you about what that might look like. With that, Becky, I'd like to throw it back to you so that we could get into a few questions and answers before the end of the half hour.
Thank you, Jay. Thanks for sharing some great information here. So we will open the floor to questions now, as Jay mentioned. And while you're typing those in, just like to let you know that this webinar has been recorded and will be available on the USDM website, which is, of course, USDM.com. Most likely by day's end or first thing tomorrow morning, we'll have it up for your review or for sharing with colleagues. Many of you are very familiar with USDM capabilities in compliance projects, but did you know that USDM offers staff augmentation as well? Our project teams, of course, support start-to-finish compliance. The projects are led by a subject matter expert or practice directors or program project managers and utilize USDM team members with various skill sets. And based on client preferences, we can be flexible in our availability to work on-site or remotely based on your preference and based on cost effectivity options. So if you're needing extra hands to meet project deadlines, USDM staff augmentation supports your internally managed projects with solid team members offering various skill sets and experience specifically needed for your project. The goal for this scenario is, the USDM goal is, of course, client delight, which results in repeat business and excellent referrals for our teams. So with that, let's move on to the questions. Thank you all for participating here. The first question, Jay, is does the extension apply to all UDI requirements?
Great question. Thank you, Becky. No, it doesn't. As I mentioned earlier on, it really only applies to the label requirement. So importantly, and I think this is critical, if you haven't started to understand your master data management program and how you're going to collect, store, normalize, validate, and finally submit data to the Good ID, those requirements still exist for the FDAs devices. So for September 24th of 2015, you still need to get all of the information into the Good ID for your products, even in advance of them being, if you will, marked or identified with the UDI.
Thank you, Jay. Follow-on question again, this is from John, and the question is, does the extension apply to all FDAs, i.e. September 2015 devices?
It doesn't. It only applies, so there are a lot of devices that fall into that category. It's life-sustaining or life-supporting devices, that's one categorization, or implants, which is another categorization, two classification flags that FDA uses for the classification of all devices. And if you're a Class 1 or Class 2 manufacturer and you're by product code, if you're a regulation, you're flagged as one of those, then you're a FDAs device. It is only those devices that are otherwise FDAs devices, implants, and are implants and are distributed non-sterile. So, and again, it's a limited subset of all of the FDAs devices that have been granted this label extension to 2016.
Thank you, Jay. And I think you're answering the next question, which is from Susan, asking if the extension applies to implants distributed in sterile form.
Yes, you're right. So if you're this is really only those devices that are distributed in a way that they're intended to be taken out of their package and sterilized or cleaned and sterilized before use. So we're really talking about sets, trays, caddies, kits, those kinds of devices. And there are quite a few that fall into this category, but it's really those non-sterile implants. And there are plenty of other implants. Many of them were Class 3 and remain in their packaging, sterile packaging, up to the point of use. Those devices, whether they're Class 2 or Class 3, still have their original deadlines. It's really only those non-sterile products.
Thank you, Jay. The next question is from Ramey, asking what other methods to meet the UDI requirements so far that it's available at the point of use besides direct implant.
Right.
Direct marking, I mean, sorry, there's a correction, yeah.
Right. As I mentioned, there were largely 5 here. One of the slides, slide 14 in the deck, that talks to at least 5 of the options or solutions that various manufacturers are looking at. There may be others that come along, but typically one solution isn't going to work for an entire product portfolio for any individual manufacturer. So we really need to look at each product line and decide what is going to be the best solution. It'll likely be some mix of these. To the extent that direct marking works, that's fine. To the extent that the product can be tagged, that probably works. And to the extent that packaging them in a sterile package and distributing them is probably the simplest solution. And again, some mix of these along with, at least we believe, a kind of inference mobile application, as I talked about for our UDI Connect tool, is one that will also be part of what manufacturers will use to become compliant.
Thank you, Jay. Next question from Marie. Should we be working towards a non-sterile solution even though the FDA has not provided specific direction yet?
I do. I think FDA has given the direction and edict that it's going to give, which is industry, you need to fix this. You need to solve this. You didn't want direct marking, and that's fine. And I think the comment, they were by far the most organized and persuasive comments that were received to the proposed rule were around the cost and complexity of direct marking. So that requirement is gone, but again, we're left with this gap that I don't think we all particularly understood at the time in terms of how do we identify a device at the point of implantation, which again, always was the point, was the key, was the focus and driving factor for UDI around these device types. There's obviously a number of other activities for different devices, but this was really the key. And again, I draw your attention to, for example, the post-market surveillance action plan and this whole idea of documenting implantation in electronic health records and other clinical information systems and claims data to support a host of post-market surveillance activities that occur today in the pharmaceutical space that do not occur in the device space because we don't have the infrastructure in place. So that's always been the goal, and I think this gap is something that we just need to overcome in order to bring us all back to where we originally were.
Great. Part 2 of the question from Marie asking, are the hospitals going to be required to record the UDI?
It's a great question. The short answer is probably yes. The longer answer is it won't. FDA doesn't have regulatory authority in most situations over hospitals. So there are other drivers, and there's quite a bit of other work that is going on, some of it being spearheaded by Pew, and others around documentation of implantation, for example, in electronic health records as part of meaningful use or as part of claims, so something that would be in claims data. So these activities are underway to, I don't want to say force, I'm not sure that's the right word, but require or facilitate this documentation. So it will occur, it is coming, it's not an FDA requirement, but likely a driver from other corners of the healthcare system.
Thank you, Jay. Next question is from Angad, saying thank you very much for the presentation. And the question is, what compliance challenges some implantable device manufacturers are facing and how to overcome the obstacles?
Right. So I think this activity of understanding how to make or provide UDI at the point of implantation is something that we're all struggling with, and it's really a matter of assessing or reassessing how your products are currently identified, distributed, and looking at the various product portfolios and deciding of the 5 options or other options that you want to put on the table, some subset of options, which ones you're going to use for which device types. This is a challenge that everyone or most of us that are in this space are facing, and I think we'll end up seeing, as I said before, a mix of solutions to this particular problem.
Thank you, Jay. Next question is from Gayatri, asking what would the most important thing to consider be for the validation of labeling requirements for the UDI. And if you don't mind, I'll share my thoughts about the most important thing. That would be to reach out to USDM team for validation support and direction. Of course, that's key for me, but I'll let Jay answer it for real.
No, that's a great question. There's a number of issues to consider. I'm not sure I would know where to start to easily answer this, but there's a number of validation activities that need to take place, both from a system perspective and from a UDI label perspective. One needs to assure that the information that is available is correct and is readable. So there's a number of activities that need to take place. I'm happy to maybe take that one offline.
With a little more detail, of course. Thank you, Jay.
Yes.
Next question for Connie. On the issues to consider slide, is your interpretation that if the kit exemption is not used, then the components within that kit are not subjected to Bullet 2?
Okay, I need to go back to that slide so that I can remember.
Oh.
One too many.
There we go.
Well, if you don't, I'm not sure I understand the question exactly, but if the kit exception is not used, so the kit exception allows you to put a UDI on the kit, which means that the components of the kit, or in case of combination product, the device constituent parts, are exempt from UDI. So that's what the kit exception allows you to do. So if you're not taking advantage of the kit exception, it means that you are somehow already identifying or providing the UDI on the individual components that are within that kit. So I suppose the answer to that is yes, that if you're not using the kit exception, if you're identifying the individual components already, you have a UDI on the individual components within the kit already, then there really is probably not an issue, or you've achieved the goal that I believe that FDA has set forth. But again, happy to maybe take that one offline if I'm not understanding the question correctly.
Thank you, Jay. All right. Last question here from Marie. What are the anticipated changes that will be made as a result of the extension if we're expected to come up with an undefined solution?
Well, the changes, I think, are that FDA has put back or sort of put back onto manufacturers' doorstep the problem of identifying implants at the point of implantation. So whatever other paths one might have been on from a UDI compliance perspective, we've kind of been brought back to this. So we're kind of back to the conversation as it originally sort of occurred in the proposed rule stage, which is, okay, we're going to put a UDI on each individual implant because that's going to provide a way. There were a number of use cases. One of them was a way of providing the UDI at the point of implantation. There were other use cases that we could get into, but are secondary, I think, to that, which was always the primary. FDA recognized at the time that maybe not all implants could be identified, but that was something that was sort of a smaller case versus the larger case. Now we don't have a direct marking requirement. It's still an option, and I think it's a viable option, but it may be one that isn't available for all products. So the change, I think, is that manufacturers have to find a way of solving this problem. And I don't mean to suggest that they need to do it in a vacuum or by themselves. I have always believed that this is a systemic problem. We need to work, across manufacturers, cross trading partners, with all stakeholders, work with hospitals and other users to understand what is actually going to work. And so I think there's an opportunity. I think it's a great opportunity that people, manufacturers in particular, should take advantage of to begin a conversation about how these products are distributed, how they're used, how use is recorded, and what that whole life cycle looks like, and then to, based on that assessment and that conversation, to decide what the best way to provide this. I mean, ultimately, this is going to be a requirement. One of the previous participants asked about hospitals needing to document, and though we have a handful that are looking to do that now, this will become a requirement across the board. Maybe not for every single implant in every single instance, but I think the large majority. So this is going to be everyone's issue to deal with as we move forward, and so I think that's the change. I mean, that's what's happened now, is that FDA has drawn a new line in the sand, if you will, and as manufacturers of non-sterile implants attempting to become UDI compliant, we have a different threshold maybe than most people had originally envisioned in terms of what UDI compliance is going to look like.
Very good, Jay. Thank you for that. All right, I think we do have a last question coming in there. If we have another minute, Jay.
Sure.
Chantel is asking if DPM of implants is chosen as method of UDI communication. Do the DPM exceptions also apply as written in 801.45?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a very interesting thought process. But if you stick with me here for a moment. So originally the requirement was we're going to direct mark implants, and recognizing that for various reasons that are described in 801.45, not all implants can be marked, or actually it was more broadly when we talked about direct marking, but not all devices can be directly marked. But let's just talk about implants. Not all implants can be directly marked, and so there's a series of self-exceptions that can be taken. What the proposed rule didn't do, though, at the time was to speak to, okay, fine, you can't directly mark those devices. How is the UDI of that implant going to be made available? The issue became moot, if you will, because in the process of moving from the proposed to final rule, the direct marking requirement was removed. So not being able to direct mark an implant doesn't solve what I consider to be kind of the new threshold that has been created, which is UDI of an implant needs to be available at the point of implantation, full stop. So if for certain devices direct marking doesn't work for whatever reason, you don't need to necessarily, you can take advantage of the 80145 exceptions, but it's not a regulatory requirement, so the exceptions are irrelevant, really. You can mark it or not mark it, that's your choice as a manufacturer. There is no regulatory requirement, so therefore the regulatory exceptions aren't relevant. What is still, though, paramount is notionally that you have to find a way of providing the UDI at the point of implantation. So for those devices that you choose to direct mark, that's great. You would, in my view, have met the challenge, have met the edict. But if you don't, for whatever reason, and it doesn't have to be for one of the exceptions that are listed, it could be for whatever reason you choose, you have to find another way of providing the UDI at the point of implantation. So what was kind of the original argument is no more. It's now sort of a different discussion with a different set of issues and a different endpoint.
Tremendous. All right. I do think with that we should wrap it up and let our attendees get back to their day here. We do appreciate everybody taking the time to join us and participate in this session. I would encourage you all to visit the USDM website. You'll find more information there around upcoming webinar events and the recorded sessions of previously presented topics. I know there are several there on the UDI front, as well as I believe over 50 now on the various practice areas that you could share with your team, and sharing information and maybe pointing in the right direction on some topics. Also, let us know if we're on the right track. We are very open to feedback and have a spirit of continuous improvement, I should say, at USDM, and we're very open for suggestions on future presentation topics. Let us know what pain points you're struggling with, and we can help get your questions answered. Thank you, Jay. So grateful for your time in presenting here and sharing information. And with that, we'd like to let you know that we do appreciate the opportunity to team with you in working towards excellence and compliance. Have a wonderful day.